Hi, old guy in shed here. Today, slight diversion to what I normally talk about. I think, well no, talk about motorbikes. Obviously, me specifically talking about two-stroke engines. These are my two-stroke bikes. I've got the 250 Benelli, which I love to bits, twin cylinder, sparkly little bike, absolutely wonderful to ride. A much more civilised Suzuki GT380 3-cylinder, and as I've said before, if you've got a single cylinder two-stroke, you can get twice as much trouble with the twin and 3 times more with the triple. It's pretty much simple as that, because they are individual engines. If you're going to talk about two-strokes, most people automatically think of Japan, and think of Yamaha, Suzuki, etc. and Kawasaki. But their success, historically and factually, is down to 3 people really, and they're Germans. One was Adolf Schnurr. Schnurr porting was a huge leap forward, because instead of I suppose I better stop before we get into Schnurr porting and the other guys. I think, although I'm talking to a knowledgeable audience, I hope, I'm sure I am, but I'll just give a quick rundown of how a two-stroke works. Carburettor draws fuel in as the piston goes up, and it draws it into the crankcases. As the piston goes up, it creates a vacuum in the crankcase. So it draws the fuel in there. As the piston comes down, it transfers that pressure. It goes from negative to positive pressure. That positive pressure forces the mixture then to go up in ports, basically into the cylinder. The piston then comes up, compresses that mixture, sets fire to it, obviously, comes back down. Now as it's coming down, it's pushing the next charge up, and as it's going up, it's bringing the next charge in. So it's a flow, it's a constant flow. Although it's called a two-stroke, it's not defined like a 4-stroke where you go, suck, squeeze, bang, blow. It doesn't work like that. Get that out of your head. Because while it's compressing, it's bringing in the next lot underneath. While it's pushing that down and bringing it in, it's getting rid of the first lot. So it's all like, it's almost like a gas transfer system. It's thermodynamic almost. It's hard to put into words, for me to put into words. I'm sure there's guys out there who can explain it way better than I can. But what was happening on the early two-strokes, they were seriously inefficient. Because as this charge came up from the crankcase and into the cylinder, it did piss off down the exhaust. What was left got burnt, but an awful lot just fell out the exhaust. And this was not good. This really was not good. It made them very thirsty, inefficient, not much power. And a German by the name of Adolf Schnurr came along, and he basically was an aircraft. He did a lot of aircraft stuff during World War II for the Germans, obviously. But what he did was bring these ports and point them away from the exhaust. Sorry, I'll do it the other way. The exhaust is here. He pointed these away from the exhaust, so the gases came in to the back of the cylinder and gave them a chance for the piston to shut the exhaust port before this all happened. That's the first thing. Whilst that was going on, there was another bunch of Germans working on two-strokes, and this was basically what later became the MZ factory. And MZ had 2 guys, very important figures in two-stroke design. One was Walter Kagan, something like that. and the other was Ernst Degner. Ernst Degner was taken on by the other guy, Walter Kagan. He was the manager of the race team. And in those days there was an awful lot of prestige in winning races, and there's a lot of national pride going on. And he was very, very good. And he saw Degner ride on a privateer bike and was really quick. And so he got and employed him to come to the team. This employment, he was also a very good engineer. Degner was an engineer. Let's just get that squared off. He is an engineer as well as a very good rider, and he could bring feedback. Kagan, whatever it was, he understood about this business of harmonics within a two-stroke and developed the expansion chamber and how it could help. The expansion chamber on a two-stroke is a fascinating game. If you get into it, it'll send your mind into a knot. It really will. Basically, you get a bang, which comes out of the exhaust port, sends it down the exhaust. There's then a cone at the back, you know the shape of a expansion chamber, that reflects that sound wave back, but it inverts it on the way back. So you get this inverted sound wave, which is due to the length of the pipe and where it is and how fast sound travels, etc. You can time that wave to hit that exhaust port just at the right moment and stop any fuel coming out. This increases your fuel charge. This decreases your wastage coming down the pipe and gives you a much more efficient engine. And he understood this. He also understood inlet harmonics. He also understood how getting your carburettor closer to the crank business was a better thing to do for power, just for sheer power. And then they started learning how do you get the fuel into the crankcase a bit more efficiently, because as the piston comes down, it pushes the bloody fuel back out of the carburettor. You've seen this, I'm sure. You've opened the carburettor on a two-stroke, open the throttle on a two-stroke, you get this standoff of fuel coming back out of the carburettor. Their answer was to not put it on the back of the cylinder anymore, but to put it on the side of the crankcase with a disc valve. So the disc would open, suck the bloody stuff in, shut the valve. That worked really well. Another way of doing it was because you ended up with the carburettor stuck on the outside, which wasn't a great plan really. They would then take this carburettor, put it back where it originally was, and put a reed valve. I'm sure you've seen reed valve engines, which are like, they're this sort of shape. So as the fuel comes through, they open, and when the positive pressure hits them, they shut. And these little reeds, they'll literally flutter. Really good. And as material technology moved on, and we had better fibres and better resins to make these things out of, because they originally made them out of steel, which was really not a very good idea, because when they break off, they do real damage. And they do break off because of this fluttering effect. But that also increased the power. So as you can see, it's quite a big development from Ernst Degner. Ernst Degner understood everything that Walter Kagan had said, and they both embraced the Schnurr porting, and that became the norm everywhere. So he's now out of the development. But the real development came in exhaust, inlet, harmonics, all within these engines. Then extra porting, and then extra little ports for exhausts. Because one of the problems is, the bigger the exhaust, the more power you get. You get to a point where the piston rings start popping into the exhaust and doing damage, so there's a limiting factor. So then you had different bridge ports. And then you had people like Rotax, for example, who would have their exhaust port with two little side ports for the exhaust. Fascinating stuff, really is fascinating stuff. Which is really good for people like me who are interested in this sort of stuff. What this gives you, by the time you've got this exhaust pipe sorted, for the application you're going to use it for. Because that exhaust pipe can change the characteristic of the engine beyond belief. It can give you very high power with a very narrow power band. So if you're doing trials riding or motocross, it's no good for you. You need a softer engine with a wider power band. And the GP bikes of Barry Sheen's and Kenny Roberts' era, they were animals. Those boys were so brave to race those things. They were just animal bikes. I've, over the years, had the pleasure of riding things like the Kawasaki 500, which, my God, what an animal. What an animal. It wasn't called the Widowmaker for nothing. And this is where my personal attachment to two-strokes comes from. So let's just carry on. Sorry, I sort of digress. Ernst Degner had understood all of this, and he was a good engineer in his own right. He was a very good rider who could then interpret back. And he was in East Germany, and he was married. And he went to the Swedish Grand Prix, and here's where his real fame came from, I guess. Perhaps a little unfairly, I don't know. I've never lived in a communist country. But he decided he was going to defect. And it was actually claimed by the MZ factory that for him to defect, he had to not finish a race. So as he could just melt away, because if he was in the race, he'd be surrounded by people, he'd be surrounded by all the officials, and he'd blah blah blah. So it was said he wrecked the engine deliberately. The original story was that the urban myth was that he rode off the circuit and rode away. He didn't. He took a ferry from Sweden to West Germany, where he met his wife, who had already defected. And they got themselves picked up by Suzuki. Suzuki employed him. Had he not failed in Sweden on the 125 MZ that he was racing, he would have become world champion. Also, MZ would have been world champions. And this is where the claim that he did it deliberately came from when he defected. We'll never know. We'll never know. You can go and read about it. It's a fascinating story. But basically, he took all this information and went to Japan, to Suzuki, and won his only world championship, which was on the 50cc. He came second, I think, for MZ in the 250 World Championship. And you've also got to remember, like, we all talk about MotoGP these days. So there is Moto2, but the Moto2 and the Moto3 guys don't get the adulation that the 250 and 125 guys did back in the day. 50cc racing was huge, and one of the Spanish circuits is called the Angel Nieto circuit. He was a 50cc racer. He was world champion. And it was huge. It was much bigger than it is today. In fact, I'm not too sure we still do 50cc racing. But we had firms like Creedler, Puch, Derby were very, very big, etc. Suzuki came along with their 50cc and won it with Ernst Degner. So he was quite a guy. I'd love to have met him. He died at the age of 51, 52, something like that. In Spain. I think it's one of the Spanish islands. I'd have to look that up again. But yeah, it was a bit sad really. For a world champion, he ended up running a car hire company. I don't know how that's happened, you know. But if you start looking at the work that was done by the original guys, let's just pull it back again to Adolf Schnell, for example, who went on to work for DKW, who became Auto Union, that became Audi. You can see this progression of the engineers, these guys, their input, their engineering input to these companies was massive, absolutely massive. So having got to all of this and having looked at the strokers, and I know loads of people, this has all come about because I had somebody make a comment that he liked the smell but hated the sound. Well, when I ride this one, for example, or either of them, you don't really hear the exhaust note. As a rider, you hear this massive induction noise, and it really is, it's quite nice, it's quite a good sound, and they just roar at you. And when they come on song, unlike a 4-stroke, which you do get this, you can get pokey 4-stroke, obviously, that have very aggressive camshaft timing, and they give you that power surge. But it's nothing like a stroker. Nothing like a stroker. When a stroker comes on song and it hits its harmonic point, they just come alive, and I would argue with anybody that isn't a great feeling, because it really is a great feeling. You've just gone, and really good. Handling them and riding them is very, very different. You do have to use the gearbox a lot more because they have quite a much more pronounced power band. So as it comes into its power band, bang, you've got it in here. If you drop out of it, they go and they're a bit flat. And once you're on the other side of it, they're just making noise and they're not really delivering any power. So you've got to keep it in that power band. And if you want to enjoy your ride, and part of your ride is getting in tune with the bike, that's what 2-strokes can give you. They can give you this sort of feeling of you are part of the machine. And it's why I kind of like them. I can't get away from it. The 70s 2-strokes are absolutely bloody wonderful. They really are fantastic machines. And it's sad that we've lost it. And to give Italy its due, you know, I mean, we talk about the Japanese an awful lot when it comes to 2-strokes, but to give the Italians their due, they embrace the 2-stroke big time. Lambretta and Vespa. I know there's the argument about scooters and what have you, but it's undeniably a commercial success, undeniably. And you have things like the little 3-wheeler Apes that you see it. They've never caught on in this country, just never caught on in this country. And a load of people think they're called the Piaggio make them. The people who now own Moto Guzzi and Aprilia. And the Piaggio, to our eyes, it looks like ape. It's A-P-E. It's not, it's Ape. And Ape is B. It's Italian for B, for the buzzy noise that they make. They carry cargo all over the bloody place today, right now. You can go to Italy, or in fact parts of France, especially southern, you know, the south end, south coast of France, and Spain, and you see these little things working away, and they're brilliant. They've never taken off, never been used in this country. I don't know why, but they just haven't. They've never had a market hog. But yeah, all 2-stroke, all 2-stroke. Nothing wrong with 2-stroke engines. Ask any forester with his chainsaw, ask any builder with his disc cutter. All 2-strokes are fabulous things. And the advent of things like chrome bores, where they could tighten up all those tolerances, they really did make a difference. Because now the bottom end compression, which has got nothing to do with the compression at the top end, because it goes from vacuum to positive pressure, primary compression, has made a massive difference because you get no blow-by, so the bottom end is much better sealed, has high integrity. I hope this has been interesting. I find it a fascinating subject. I love talking about this sort of thing because it's the developments, what we have enjoyed all our lives, and understanding who gave us that enjoyment, who produced these machines to allow us to have a laugh, you know, and to smile a lot. It's worth sort of tipping to them and say, yeah, good job, guys, good job. Because without these 3 really inventive people, Japan wouldn't have got these things. We would never have enjoyed them. Italy wouldn't have given us these things. We would never have enjoyed them. The difference in the Italian strokers and the Japanese strokers is quite fascinating. That's a very interesting comparison to make. When we raced, or when I raced back in the day, various machines, we used to put what we called stuffers into the crankcases. Now this could be actually on the crankshaft itself, on the cheeks of the flywheels, because there'd be dips in them. You'd fill that space up. You'd fill the space up in the porting, and these stuffers were to increase the velocity of the mixture going through the chamber up to the through the transfer ports up to the cylinder. And we used to make stuffers. We make them out of the nylon or lumps of allium plate and all sorts of concoctions just to get a little bit more out of them. But why I really do like the Italian, there's nowhere to put a stuffer in these. They are so tightly made in the crankcases, so beautifully done. There's just nowhere to put them. So these are almost done for you. I think that's where a lot of their performance comes from. Whereas the Japanese have it slightly, they're very nice, don't get me wrong, but there's room for improvement, there always is. So you can spend more time and money on this than you could on this. That's only my opinion, okay? That's only my opinion. The reality is that they're all good. By the time we got to this point in the 70s of two-stroke development, they were all very, 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 very good. I'd like to say, I love them to bits. I hope you found this interesting, my view of strokers. If so, put something in the bottom here in the comments and argue with me if you wish. It's fine. I'm prepared to take on another discussion. But keep in mind, I'm talking about the 70s, and a 250 Honda, for example, as good as it was a very good motorbike, CB250. It wasn't sparkling. Got a guy to work, got him home from work, but it really wasn't like an RD or a Benelli or Kawasaki. It didn't really get the blood racing. So if you like it, hit the like button and the subscribe if you wish, please. Or share this with other people. See who you can find who disagrees with me or agrees with me. Go and look these guys up. They're fascinating. Just spend 5 minutes on Wikipedia or whatever, and you'll find that they were interesting people, very interesting. I wish I had half their skill and knowledge. Anyway, this is Old Grind Shed. That's it for me this week, and maybe next week we'll start looking at the old Guzzi again, because I've been doing a lot of work on that. Take care.